My parents secretly invited my ex to my wedding, which ruined my life and my future marriage. So I'm sitting here now, 32 years old, with a decent job, a nice apartment, and a life that's finally stable. It's wild to think how I got here after everything went down. Back in the day, I had this girlfriend. Let's call her Sarah. We started dating in high school, and for years, it was like we were glued together. She was my first real love, the kind where you think it's forever because you don't know any better. I spent so much energy on her. Late-night arguments, making up, planning our future. It was exhausting, but I was in deep. My parents? They adored her. Treated her like she was their own kid. Sometimes I'd catch them siding with her over me during dumb family debates, and it stung. They'd invite her over for dinner even when I wasn't around, like she was part of the family already. I didn't mind too much back then. I figured it was a good sign for the future. I was wrong. We were together for years, and I was ready to take it to the next level. I had this whole proposal planned out, nothing fancy, just a quiet night at the park we used to hang out at. But before I could even buy the ring, everything fell apart. Sarah cheated on me. She didn't even try to hide it after it happened. She came clean one night at my parents' house. We were all there, me, her, mom, and dad. She sat on their couch, crying, saying she messed up with some guy from her college class. I was gutted. Couldn't even look at her. What killed me more was my parents' reaction. They didn't yell at her or kick her out. Instead, they hugged her, told her it was okay, and then turned to me. They said I should forgive her, that people make mistakes, that she was still family. I couldn't believe it. My own parents were choosing her over me, even after she ripped my heart out. That was the breaking point. After Sarah's confession, I couldn't stay in that house any longer. My parents kept pushing me to work things out with her, like her cheating was just a speed bump. I'd come home from work, and they'd be on the phone with her, checking in, asking how she was holding up. Meanwhile, I was the one falling apart. I'd hear them talking about me like I was the bad guy for not getting over it fast enough. It was suffocating. I started resenting them, big time. Every time I saw Sarah's old hoodie still hanging in the closet or heard my mom mention her name, it was like a punch to the gut. I couldn't take it anymore. So, I made a decision. I had to get out. I found a job in another city, nothing special, just a warehouse gig that paid enough to cover rent. I packed up my stuff, told my parents I was leaving, and didn't look back. They weren't happy about it. Mom cried, Dad gave me this disappointed lecture about running away from problems. But I didn't care. I needed space, a fresh start, anything to stop feeling like the loser in my own life. The move was rough at first. New place, no friends, just me in a cheap apartment with leaky faucets. I'd spend nights scrolling through my phone, trying not to think about Sarah or my parents. It was lonely, but it was better than staying where I was. Slowly, I started building something for myself. New routines, new coworkers, a life that didn't revolve around her or them. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Living in the new city wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I worked my warehouse job, saved up some cash, and kept my head down. After a few months, I started feeling less like a guy running from his past and more like someone who could actually have a future. That's when I met Jen. She worked at this coffee shop I'd hit up on weekends. Tall, quiet, with a dry sense of humor that caught me off guard. We'd chat when I ordered, nothing big, just small talk about the weather or how the coffee machine was acting up again. One day, she wrote her number on my receipt. I didn't expect it, but I wasn't about to let it slip by. I texted her, we went out, and it just clicked. Jen was different from Sarah. She didn't demand every second of my attention or drag me into endless drama. We'd hang out, watch movies, cook dinner, simple stuff that felt good. For once, I wasn't stressing over a relationship. After about a year, I knew she was the one. I proposed to her in our living room one night after we'd burned a batch of cookies. Nothing planned, just spontaneous. She said yes, and I was on top of the world. Around that time, I'd started talking to my parents again. Not a lot, just calls here and there. They seemed happy I was doing better, and I figured enough time had passed to let the old wounds heal. I invited them to the wedding. Thought it'd be a clean slate. Big mistake. Planning the wedding with Jen was stressful but exciting. We kept it small, just close friends, her family, and my parents. I didn't want anything flashy, and she was cool with that. We booked a little venue by a lake, set up a playlist, and figured out a buffet-style dinner. My parents offered to help with some costs, which I appreciated since I wasn't rolling in cash. They sounded genuinely excited on the phone, asking about Jen, saying they couldn't wait to meet her. I started thinking maybe I'd misjudged them, maybe they'd changed. I told them the date, the time, the address, and left it at that. Never occurred to me they'd pull something behind my back. I didn't talk to them much in the final weeks before the wedding. Too busy with work and last-minute details. Jen and I were running around, picking up her dress, confirming the cake, all that chaos. I was nervous but happy, felt like I was finally getting the life I'd wanted. My parents showed up the day before, all smiles, helping set up chairs and chatting with Jen's folks. Everything seemed fine. I had no clue what they'd done until the actual day hit. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. They'd always had a soft spot for Sarah, and I'd been dumb enough to think that was over. The wedding day started out perfect. I woke up early, got dressed in my suit, nothing fancy, just a gray one I'd picked out with Jen, and headed to the venue. The lake was calm, the weather was clear, and people were already trickling in. Jen looked incredible when I saw her in her dress, this simple white thing that made her glow. We did the ceremony quick, no long speeches or anything, just vows and rings. I was grinning like an idiot the whole time. My parents were there in the front row, clapping, acting like everything was normal. After we said, "I do," everyone moved to the reception area, some tables set up outside with string lights and music playing. I thought it was going to be smooth sailing from there. Then I saw her. Sarah. Standing by the edge of the crowd, holding a glass of wine like she belonged there. My stomach dropped. She was wearing this green dress, hair done up, looking like she'd planned to be noticed. I hadn't seen her in years, not since that night at my parents' house, and here she was, at my wedding. I scanned the crowd and caught my mom's eye. She looked away fast, pretending to fuss with a napkin. My dad just stared at his plate. It hit me, they'd invited her. They'd gone behind my back and brought my ex to the one day that was supposed to be about me and Jen. I was furious, but I didn't want to make a scene, not yet. Jen noticed her too, and I saw her face tighten. She didn't say anything, just squeezed my hand under the table. I could tell she was pissed. Things got worse when everyone sat down to eat. People were chatting, plates clinking, and then Sarah stood up. She tapped her glass with a spoon, like she was about to give a toast. I froze. She started talking, loud enough for everyone to hear, about how we'd been together since high school, how we'd been so in love, how we'd had this perfect little life. My friends were looking at me, confused. Jen's family was shifting in their seats. Sarah kept going, painting this rosy picture of us, and then she dropped the bomb. She said I'd cheated on her. Said that's why we broke up, that I'd been the one to ruin everything. It was a flat-out lie. She cheated on me, confessed it herself, and now she was flipping the story in front of everyone I cared about. My parents didn't even flinch, they just sat there, watching. I lost it. I stood up, cut her off mid-sentence, and told her to get out. My voice was shaking, but I didn't care. She tried to argue, saying she deserved to be heard, but I wasn't having it. I grabbed her arm, not hard, just enough to steer her toward the exit, and walked her out. People were staring, whispering. I could feel Jen's eyes on my back. When I got Sarah to the parking lot, I let go and told her never to show up in my life again. She smirked, said something about me always being a jerk, and left. I stood there for a minute, trying to calm down, but the damage was done. I walked back into the reception, and it was like the air had changed. The music was still playing, but the chatter had died down. People were picking at their food, avoiding eye contact with me. Jen was sitting at our table, staring at her plate, her hands clenched in her lap. I could see her eyes were red, she'd been crying. My parents were a few seats away, acting like nothing happened, talking to Jen's aunt about the weather or some nonsense. I sat down next to Jen, and she didn't look at me. I knew she'd heard every word Sarah said, and that lie about me cheating had hit her hard. I wanted to scream at my parents right there, but I held it in. The wedding was already a mess, I didn't need to make it worse. I leaned over to Jen and whispered that none of it was true. She nodded, but it was stiff, like she wasn't sure what to believe. The rest of the night dragged on. People tried to keep things light. Jen's brother cracked a few jokes, her friends danced, but the vibe was off. I kept glancing at my parents, trying to figure out why they do this. They didn't say a word to me about Sarah, just kept smiling and eating their cake like it was all part of the plan. By the time the night ended, Jen and I were barely talking. We said goodbye to everyone, got in the car, and drove home in silence. I knew I had a fight coming, with her, with my parents, with the whole damn situation. When we got home, Jen went straight to the bedroom and shut the door. I stood in the living room, still in my suit, trying to process what had happened. My wedding day, our wedding day, was supposed to be the start of something good, and now it was a disaster. I couldn't let it sit. I grabbed my phone and called my parents. They picked up on the third ring, sounding cheerful, like nothing was wrong. I didn't waste time. I asked them why they invited Sarah, why they let her ruin everything. There was a long pause, and then my mom admitted it. They'd reached out to Sarah a month ago, told her about the wedding, and asked her to come. They thought it'd be a nice surprise, a way to heal old wounds. Then it got worse. Dad chimed in and said they told Sarah to say I cheated. They figured it'd make Jen doubt me, maybe even call things off, because they still wanted me to end up with Sarah. I was speechless. My own parents had sabotaged my marriage because they couldn't let go of my ex. I yelled at them, called them selfish, told them they'd crossed a line they couldn't come back from. Mom started crying, saying they just wanted me to be happy, but I hung up. I didn't want to hear it. After that, I went to Jen. She was sitting on the bed, still in her dress, looking wrecked. I told her everything, Sarah's cheating, my parents' betrayal, the whole ugly truth. She listened, didn't say much, but I could see her softening. I promised her I'd never lied to her, and she finally nodded. We didn't sleep much that night, just sat there, trying to figure out how to move forward. The next few days were rough. Jen and I stayed home, avoiding everyone. We didn't talk much about the wedding, just focused on normal stuff like making breakfast or watching TV. I could tell she was still shaken, but she didn't bring up Sarah or my parents. I was grateful for that. I didn't know what to do about them either. Part of me wanted to cut them off for good, they'd gone too far, and I couldn't trust them anymore. But they were still my parents, and that made it complicated. I kept replaying the wedding in my head, wondering how I'd missed the signs. Jen started opening up after a while. She said she believed me about Sarah, but the whole thing had scared her, made her wonder if my past was going to keep popping up. I told her I'd do whatever it took to prove it wouldn't. Work became my escape. I'd go in early, stay late, anything to keep my mind off the mess. Jen started picking up extra shifts at the coffee shop too. We were both trying to get back to normal, but it wasn't easy. My parents called a few times, left voicemails saying they were sorry, but I didn't call back. I wasn't ready. One night, Jen and I finally sat down and hashed it out. She said she didn't want them at our place, not for a while, maybe not ever. I agreed. We decided to focus on us, build something new without their shadow hanging over it. It wasn't a perfect fix, but it was a start. Slowly, we started feeling like a team again. It's been a few months since the wedding, and things have settled, mostly. Jen and I are still together, living our quiet life in the city. We've got our routines, work, dinners at home, weekends by the lake when we can swing it. The wedding feels like a distant memory now, though it still stings if I think about it too long. I haven't talked to my parents since that phone call. They've sent texts, even a letter, saying they messed up and want to fix things. I don't know if I'll ever let them back in, not fully. They chose Sarah over me, tried to tank my marriage, and that's not something I can just shrug off. Jen's on the same page, she doesn't trust them either. We're better off keeping our distance for now. Looking back, I'm still mad, but I'm also glad I got out of that old life. Sarah's gone for good, and my parents don't get to run the show anymore. I've got Jen, a job that pays the bills, and a place that feels like mine. It's not the future I pictured back in high school, but it's real. I used to think happiness was tied to the people who'd let me down, my ex, my family, but I was wrong. I built this life myself, and I'm not letting anyone ruin it again. Sometimes I wonder if my parents will ever get why what they did was so messed up. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. Either way, I'm done waiting for them to figure it out.